My name is Marcus Tran. I'm 50 years old, and up until Tuesday morning last week, I was the senior systems analyst at Argonix Digital in Austin, Texas. 19 years. I gave that company 19 years of my life. I was there before the cloud, before smart automation, before any of these new tech bros even graduated college. I built the system they still rely on today, the one running underneath their flashy interfaces and shiny dashboards. I trained every coder who walked through those doors. I wrote the emergency protocols. I stayed through every holiday outage, every weekend disaster, every last-minute security panic. I was the guy they called when things broke. So when Eric Sutton, my manager, asked me to step into his office that morning, and Camille from HR was already sitting there with her laptop open, I knew. Before he even opened his mouth, I knew. He didn't even hesitate. Marcus, after 19 years, we've decided to eliminate your position. It's part of a larger restructuring. That was it. No thank you, no conversation, no warning. Just a surgical sentence, cold, precise. Camille slid a folder across the table. Inside was a termination packet, a week severance offer, and some generic HR printouts about next steps. I didn't argue, I didn't flinch. I simply nodded once, and left the room without saying another word. Back at my desk, people were already whispering. I could feel the glances, the ones that dart away the moment you look back. Some of them were kids I'd mentored. Others, well, they just didn't know what to say. So I packed slowly, quietly. My family photo, a chipped ceramic mug my daughter Sophie made in 6th grade, and the little cactus that somehow survived almost 2 decades under buzzing fluorescent lights. Beth from the marketing team stopped by. Her voice was shaky. "Marcus, I just heard. This is ridiculous. You are this place." I shrugged. Companies change direction. But this, without warning, after everything you've... "It's fine," I interrupted gently. It wasn't fine, but I wasn't going to make a scene. I saw Eric watching from his office window as I walked out carrying my box. No goodbye, no handshake, just surveillance like he was making sure I didn't touch a single wire on the way out. They never saw me as dangerous, because I never raised my voice, never bragged, never demanded anything. But what they never paid attention to was just how much I knew. Not because I was a genius, but because I was thorough, meticulous. I built redundancies into every system, documented everything. I designed the audit protocols they used during a compliance scare 5 years ago. I was the one who installed the quiet monitoring scripts at the legal team's request. And I still had off-site copies of the original configuration logs, encrypted, secure. That drive home was strange. No traffic, no calls, just silence. I stared up at the 16-story building I'd helped grow from 2 rented floors in a business park. 19 years. Sophie was in preschool when I joined. Now she's halfway through grad school. My wife Lydia used to joke that the servers were my second family. And she wasn't wrong. That night, as we sat on the porch sipping coffee, Lydia glanced over. "You're not angry," she said. "No," I replied. Not angry, just clear. Because I knew something was off. The signs had been creeping in for months. Eric had stopped inviting me to system architecture meetings. I started noticing permissions changing quietly, subtly. My admin access was being shaved down layer by layer. No one said anything, but it was clear. Then came Trevor Lang, the consultant Eric brought in. Expensive suits. LinkedIn full of buzzwords, always looking over his shoulder when I passed. They talked in hushed tones, locked doors. Meetings I was no longer copied on, memos I never received. They were prepping something. I could feel it. 6 weeks ago, I stumbled across a document buried in the shared finance drive. It was titled Digital Modernization, Phase 2. I wasn't even on the org chart. That same day, I noticed an anomaly during a routine log check. A small payment just under $3,000 sent to a vendor I didn't recognize. Crimson Echo LLC. Looked like a software license, except we didn't use any software from them. I ran a trace. The company was registered just last year. The listed business address, a FedEx drop box, and a strip mall outside Houston. That one payment became 2, then 5, then dozens. Over the course of 20 months, Crimson Echo had received more than $6.1 million from Argonix under various service descriptions, slightly inflated just enough to fly under radar. But the kicker, the company was registered under the name Jordan Roth, Calvin Roth's brother-in-law. Calvin Roth, our chief financial officer. And just like that, the picture came into focus. Eric and Calvin didn't just restructure me out of the company. They needed me gone before I saw the whole puzzle, because I was the only one who could. The morning after I was let go, I sat in my home office in complete silence. No alarms, no rush, just stillness. Lydia placed a cup of coffee on my desk without saying a word. After 20 years of marriage, she didn't need to ask what I was thinking. She just knew. "I'm heading to the store," she said gently. "You need anything?" I shook my head. The front door clicked shut behind her, and that's when I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was a small, encrypted SSD matte black thumb-sized with no label. I'd built it myself years ago, when Argonix's legal department asked me to design a forensic tracking system for insider threats. I insisted on having an off-site protocol. They approved it, signed off, and promptly forgot it existed. I plugged the drive into my laptop. The fan spun quietly as the system decrypted layer after layer. And there it was, the proof I hadn't even realized I was collecting for over a year. Hundreds of system logs, email threads, change request histories. I pulled up a spreadsheet I'd created during my early suspicions. It tracked Crimson Echo LLC's payouts one by one. They started at $2,900, then $5 100s, then $8 700, slight jumps, just enough to stay beneath internal audit thresholds. But over 20 months, the payments totaled $6.1 million and buried in the metadata approval stamps from Calvin Roth. Sometimes his direct authorization, sometimes rerouted through a proxy, but always leading back to him. I dug deeper. Who registered Crimson Echo Jordan Roth, Calvin's brother-in-law. Linked via a digital signature reused in an old real estate document from a different scam years ago. The shell company had no website, no staff, just a virtual mailbox. I leaned back, fingers steepled. This wasn't sloppy theft. It was elegant, controlled. Every invoice had the right formatting. Every approval chain appeared valid. And that's what made it perfect. Auditors wouldn't question it, because the services were technically real licensing software consulting platform optimization. All things we genuinely needed, just padded, bloated, and funneled through a fake vendor. And I realized something else they didn't expect anyone to notice. They thought I was just a 50-year-old relic, too outdated, too soft, too loyal. But they forgot one thing. I never stopped watching. That afternoon, I received a text from Riley, the junior analyst I'd mentored over the past 2 years. "Marcus, this is total BS. Just heard you're out. They gave your office to that consultant guy. I don't get it." Trevor Lang, the digital transformation specialist with no background in infrastructure, but plenty of buzzwords on LinkedIn. Scalable alignment, vertical synergy, cloud, forward leadership. He was never meant to improve the system. He was hired to erase me, to cover the tracks, to make sure that when the fraud collapsed, I wouldn't be there to say I saw it coming. I stared at Riley's message for a long time, then typed 2 words. Just watch. The next morning, Tuesday, I pulled into a coffee shop 5 miles from downtown Austin. Quiet place. No cameras, cash only. The kind of spot no one from Argonix would think to look for me. At 8:45 a.m., I logged into an old admin testing account, one that looked internal, but never made it into the company's official directory. And I sent the first volley. Subject, financial irregularities, urgent, internal review needed to Eric Sutton, body. Eric, I came across something last week during routine analysis. Payment anomalies tied to vendor Crimson Echo LLC. Requesting clarification on services rendered. Amount discrepancy approaching 7 figures. Please advise. I didn't mention Calvin or Jordan or the shell company registration. Just enough to set off alarms or curiosity. At 9:02 a.m., Eric called. I didn't pick up. A minute later, a voicemail. "Marcus, it's Eric. We received your email. This is serious. Call me back. Let's talk about this." I smiled. At 10:41 a.m., an email from Camille in HR landed in my inbox. "Mr. Tran, we are in receipt of a concerning communication you directed to Argonix staff. As per your offboarding agreement, you are not authorized to contact company employees. Future correspondence may trigger legal escalation." Cute, but I never signed their offboarding agreement, because I never agreed to disappear. And at noon, I accessed my encrypted cloud vault, the second copy of the records. The old audit logs showed something damning, a permissions change dated exactly 20 months ago. Calvin Roth requested elevated access to the financial systems not for himself, but for a temp account created just 3 days prior. That temp account, it had full invoice override privileges. exactly the level needed to push payments to Crimson Echo without raising red flags. It had never been decommissioned. I checked access logs from just last week. Someone likely Trevor Lang had used it again, probably trying to delete evidence. But they were too late. I had everything. Every access token, every invoice trail, every user ID that touched that system. They were trying to outmaneuver the guy who built the system. And failing. By late afternoon, my inbox lit up. Missed calls from Eric, Camille, and now Trevor Lang. His message was direct, Mr. Tran. I'd like to clarify some confusion regarding our IT transition. Can we meet privately to discuss? I laughed. Desperation always arrives cloaked in formality. That night, I received another message, this one from Calvin Roth. Not a call. An email with an attached updated severance agreement. The package had doubled, and included a clause barring me from contacting Argonic's staff, board members, or affiliates under threat of legal action. They still thought this was about money. They didn't understand. It was about accountability. Wednesday morning, I reached out to the one person on the board who I knew would listen, Alan Rivera. He'd been around during Argonix's early days, trusted me back when I was just the guy in the corner, making sure the backups ran on time. Marcus, he answered on the second ring. Heard you left. Not exactly by choice, I said. I need 15 minutes. He hesitated. This about the board meeting. Calvin looked panicked yesterday. Maybe I said, can we talk in person? Where? 4 miles north. Java Loop Cafe. Back patio. At 2:15 p.m. I handed him a flash drive and a sealed folder. You'll find vendor records, user logs, company registrations, email approvals, cross-referenced timestamps. It's all there. He didn't speak for a moment. Then why come to me? Because you actually read audit reports, I said. You asked the right questions. He gave a tight nod. There's a finance committee meeting tomorrow morning, he said. They won't see this coming. I'm counting on it. Later that evening, Lydia looked up from her book as I entered the living room. You okay? She asked. I nodded. But the truth was, I'd never been clearer. They thought firing me was the end. It was just the opening move. Thursday morning dawned sharp and bright. The kind of weather that dares you to pretend things are normal. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, sat on the porch, and waited. At exactly 8:00 a.m., my scheduled email delivered itself to every single board member of Argonix Digital. The subject line was simple. Before you approve Q2 bonuses, please read. Attached was the full report. It contained a comprehensive vendor payment audit, proof of invoice inflation tied to Crimson Echo LLC, business registration confirming ownership by Jordan Roth, financial access logs linking Calvin Roth, admin trail showing Eric Sutton's direct awareness, metadata proving Trevor Lang had accessed the financial override system just days ago. By 8:17 a.m., my phone began to ring, multiple calls, area codes from New York, Chicago, and San Jose, likely board member assistants. I let them go to voicemail. At 9:00 a.m., the Finance Committee's emergency session would begin, and by then, the storm would already be moving across their skies. At 9:35, I received a text from Riley. Police are here. Calvin and Eric are being questioned separately. Trevor looks like he's about to pass out. What did you do? I didn't reply. He'd find out soon enough. By 10:02 a.m., my landline rang. I hadn't used it for business in over a decade. I picked up. Mr. Tran, this is Patricia Graves, lead counsel for Argonix Digital. I waited. We'd like to speak with you directly about the information you've provided the board. I'm available by phone, I replied calmly. We'd prefer to meet in person. I wouldn't. Silence. The board is taking these allegations extremely seriously. I didn't make allegations. I submitted evidence. Another pause. Mr. Tran, if you're willing to cooperate, the board may be open to discussions regarding your future with the company. I chuckled. My future doesn't depend on Argonix. I hope you'll reconsider. We believe the board would appreciate your assistance. You already have it, I said. You just haven't finished reading yet. And I hung up. That afternoon, news broke. It started small. Just a blip on a local Austin business journal. Argonix executives face financial misconduct investigation. No names, no details, just a storm warning. But I knew what was coming next. At 1:42 p.m., Alan Rivera called me. It's a bloodbath, he said without preamble. We confronted Calvin with your documentation. He cracked. Full confession. He's trying to cut a deal, throwing Eric under the bus. And Trevor, claiming he had no knowledge. Just a consultant. Board isn't buying it. And the rest? We've placed all 3 on administrative leave. Forensic accountants are flying in Monday. Early estimate over $6.1 million diverted over 20 months, possibly more. I exhaled slow and steady. You'll be contacted formally, Alan added, but... Off the record, several board members are asking the same thing. What would it take to bring you back? That evening, Lydia and I went for a walk. Golden hour bathed the neighborhood in warmth. Our shoes crunched lightly against the sidewalk. Every porch seemed lit up with laughter children or dogs barking at squirrels. None of them knew that a billion-dollar company was unraveling, all because they underestimated the quiet man next door. Lydia squeezed my hand. You going back? I don't know, I said truthfully. They discarded me like a broken part. Now they want me to fix the machine. She smiled softly. Well, you are the one who built it. Friday morning. I walked into the Argonix Tower for the first time in 4 days. This time I wore a suit. The security guard at the front desk, a kid named Devin, looked up and did a double take, then quietly slid a visitor badge across the counter. Welcome back, Mr. Tran. Funny how titles change when the wind shifts. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt surreal. I had never even been on this level. Now I was walking straight into the boardroom. 10 board members sat around a polished walnut table, bottled water, notepads, tension thick enough to slice. Alan gave me a slight nod. At the head of the table sat the interim CEO, previously the COO, a woman named Dana Hartley. She looked uncomfortable. Mr. Tran, she began. Thank you for coming. The situation you've brought to light is unprecedented. I didn't respond. The full extent of the fraud appears worse than initially estimated. The forensic team has already confirmed the existence of multiple shell vendors, 2 of which appear linked to Mr. Roth's immediate family. I waited. On behalf of the board, we'd like to extend our deep gratitude. Still silent. Then Alan cleared his throat. Marcus, the board has unanimously voted to create a new executive position, Chief Information Security Officer. You would report directly to the board, oversight, autonomy, budget independence, and full authority over all digital procurement. I reached into my leather folder and slid a sheet across the table. My terms. Dana raised an eyebrow as she read. Full audit authority across all departments. Budget veto on any financial or IT decisions. Direct board access, bypassing, C-suite interference. 6-month rolling contract with exit rights on breach. These are unusual, she said. So was embezzling over $6 million, I replied. Silence. You have until noon, I said, standing. I have other offers. And I left the room. At 11:49 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was Alan. They've accepted your conditions, unanimously. 6 weeks later. I sat in my new office glass windows, overlooking the Austin skyline. The title plate on the door read, Marcus Tran, Chief Information Security Officer. My old department now reported up to me, though I'd promoted Riley to lead day-to-day operations. Kid had promise. Just needed someone to see it. Calvin Roth had pled guilty to multiple fraud charges. His deal shaved years off his sentence, but he'd still see prison time. Eric Sutton was trying to fight the charges, claiming he was blindsided. The board didn't believe him. And Trevor Lang, gone, fled the country for Sao Paulo. An extradition request was in motion. His consulting firm's website now showed a maintenance banner. The money, most of it had been recovered. Enough to keep the company stable and publicly quiet. But internally, the legend of Marcus Tran had begun to spread. The quiet guy who didn't fight when fired, but came back with receipts. One afternoon, Lydia stopped by. Lunch? She asked, stepping into my office. I closed my laptop, grabbed my jacket. As we walked past the IT floor, heads turned. Not out of fear, but respect. These people knew. I could have destroyed the company. Instead, I saved it. In the elevator, Lydia looked up at me. You happy? I thought for a moment. The anger was gone. The hurt faded. What remained was satisfaction. Closure. I'm good, I said, squeezing her hand. Outside, the Texas sun glinted off the buildings. My phone buzzed with a message from Alan. Board approved your Q3 security budget. No pushback. I smiled faintly. Lydia noticed. Good news. Just thinking about bridges, I said, sliding the phone into my pocket. What about them? Some collapse under their own weight, I said. Others, once rebuilt, are stronger than they ever were before. And this one, I built right this time. 6 months passed. Argonix Digital was no longer the same company I'd walked away from. The logo was the same, The building hadn't moved, but inside the soul had changed. Calvin Roth was gone, sentenced to 6 years in federal prison after cooperating. Eric Sutton had been formally terminated and was awaiting trial. Trevor Lang, tracked down, arrested at a luxury condo in Sao Paulo, now facing extradition for wire fraud. But the company still needed rebuilding, and that was my job now. Chief Information Security Officer. Not just a title, a mandate. The board had given me something more than power. They gave me full visibility. Unfiltered, direct. I wasn't buried in middle management anymore. I was the safeguard between the company's future and anyone who tried to hollow it out from the inside. My first order of business. Audit everything. Not just systems, not just finances. People, processes, culture. I made no grand announcements, no all-hands meetings, just started showing up in rooms I'd never been invited to before. I reviewed procurement approvals line by line, asked pointed questions in finance syncs, dusted off old access logs, and matched them against off-boarded employees. I flagged a dozen silent credentials that hadn't been revoked, 2 of which had been used after Trevor's departure. I installed a live breach detection overlay, one I'd written myself 5 years earlier, but never got approval to implement. Now I didn't need permission. I built new dashboards, color-coded risk zones. Each department had their own score, not just cyber risk, but behavioral risk. Overspending, access creep, communication gaps. The system didn't judge people. It tracked habits, patterns. That's what criminals rely on, patterns that go unnoticed, not on firewalls. I had my own office now. Corner suite, real wood desk. Whiteboard on the wall, covered in diagrams, flowcharts, reminders. But I never forgot what it felt like to be ignored. So I made sure no one on my team ever felt that way. Riley, now my lead infrastructure manager, thrived. I gave him full hiring authority and let him build the team he believed in. He chose well. Sharp minds, collaborative thinkers, no ego. One afternoon, he stopped by my office and handed me a folder. "Thought you should see this," he said. Inside a report on a proposed contract with a vendor named Nova Align Systems. Looked legitimate, SaaS platform, competitive pricing. But something in the legal language felt recycled. I ran it through a comparison tool I'd built years ago. Sure enough, 82% overlap with the old Crimson Echo contract. Same structure, different name. I looked up. "Good catch," I said. He smiled. "I learned from the best." Later that week, I called a private session with the board's compliance committee. Inside, I laid out everything. Nova Align. Their Delaware registration, linked to an entity that had previously shared an IP block with a shell company, dissolved after Trevor's arrest. It wasn't just legacy fraud we had to worry about. Copycats were already trying to test the perimeter. I ended the briefing with a single slide. A quote. "It's not the breach you see coming that destroys you. It's the one you ignored, because it looked like everything else." The board approved sweeping changes. We revised our vendor onboarding protocols, added third-party verification requirements, created an anonymized whistleblower portal that routed directly to my team bypassing HR. I knew what HR was like during my exit. I didn't trust them to protect the next me. Not everything was smooth. Some execs didn't love the new transparency. They were used to opaque processes, quiet approvals, little empires hidden behind acronyms. I didn't care. One SVP in marketing tried to route a $400,000 brand consulting deal through a discretionary line item. I froze the transaction and asked for a full breakdown. She scheduled a meeting. Tried to explain how the speed of innovation required adaptive autonomy. I listened, then pushed a folder across the table. "This is a breakdown of your department's Q2 spending. I've highlighted the $72,000 that went unaccounted for in last year's campaign. Should we pull the vendor logs?" Her face went blank. "We're canceling the contract," she said quietly. "Smart choice," I replied. Outside of work, things were different too. Lydia and I had time again. Weekends weren't consumed by 4 a.m. system outages or last-minute patch deployments. I'd built a team that could function without me logging in every Sunday. Sophie came home for a visit. She was writing her master's thesis, something about ethical AI governance. Over dinner, she said, "You know, Dad, most people your age get quietly replaced. But you flipped the table." I laughed. Didn't flip it, just realigned the legs. Wait. In October, I was invited to speak at a tech leadership summit in Seattle. I don't like the spotlight, but I went. My topic: when systems fail quietly, the ethics of being watchful. I didn't name names. Didn't talk about Crimson Echo or Calvin Roth. I talked about structure, power, silence. How the most dangerous moment in any company isn't when someone breaks the rules, but when everyone assumes the rules are being followed because they don't want to ask hard questions. Afterward, a young engineer from another firm approached me. That story you told about being walked out without a handshake, that happened to me last month. She looked tired. What did you do? I asked. Still figuring it out. I handed her a business card. When you're ready, reach out. Because some people need a lifeline before they can see what's possible. Back at Argonix, the tone had shifted. I wasn't the ghost of the server room anymore. People came to me with ideas, concerns, questions. Not because they were afraid, because they trusted that someone was actually paying attention, that the watchdog wasn't asleep, that someone who understood the whole map, not just the new roads, was finally in charge of the keys again. Mad. One day, I walked past the old corner where my desk used to be. Same floor, same carpet, new faces. The cactus I left behind gone. But I didn't feel sad. That wasn't home anymore. Home was the system I rebuilt, the team I empowered, the legacy I refused to let them erase. Law. And every once in a while, when I sat alone in my new office and the sun hit just right, I'd glance at the small plaque on my bookshelf one Lydia had made for me on my birthday. It said, "Never burn bridges, just reroute the network." That was the difference. They tried to delete me, but I was the one who backed everything up. A year had passed since the storm broke. Argonix Digital stood intact, profitable, and different. Publicly, there were no headlines, no lawsuits splashed across evening news. The board had moved swiftly, silencing scandal with internal accountability. Quiet settlements were reached, policies rewritten, systems replaced. But the real shift, it wasn't what happened in courtrooms. It was what happened in conference rooms. People spoke differently now. They asked questions they used to swallow. Why this vendor? What's our fallback plan? Who signed off? Curiosity had returned, and so had integrity. I no longer needed to explain what I did. I didn't have to defend my presence in rooms I used to be excluded from. They knew now. The man who had been walked out without a handshake, I was now the one with the final signature. My office, still the same corner view of downtown Austin, had gained some new decorations. Awards I didn't apply for. A security excellence citation from the state comptroller. A glass plaque from the board of directors. For safeguarding not just our systems, but our values. I didn't display it for vanity. I displayed it because the old me never would have received it. One Friday morning, I sat across from Lydia at our kitchen table. Sunlight streamed in through the window. Our phones were silent. The house was quiet. "Do you miss the old routine?" she asked, sipping her tea. I thought about it. The pre-dawn wake-ups. The always-on call schedule. Being the one who plugged leaks before anyone noticed they were flooding. "No," I said. But I remember why I tolerated it. Why? Because I thought loyalty would insulate me from betrayal. She nodded. And now I don't confuse silence with safety. Later that day, I held my final review meeting for Q4. Riley ran Point Com organized confident. He presented a quarterly threat audit, flagged a phishing simulation with a 14% failure rate, proposed a new zero-trust access layer. I barely had to interject. He'd become everything I hoped he'd be. After the meeting, he lingered. "You're really stepping back?" he asked. "I've taught you everything I know," I said. "Now it's your turn to teach me what I don't." He blinked. "Wait, you're staying?" Advisory role. 1 day a week. Relief flooded his face. "Good," he said. "I don't think I'm ready without you." "You are. You just don't believe it yet." That weekend, I sorted through an old banker's box from my storage closet. Inside, printed system blueprints from 2006, server migration logs, a badge lanyard from my first day, a post-it with Sophie's doodle, tiny stick figures labeled "Dad at Work in Cactus." Underneath it all, the mug she made me in 6th grade. Chipped, faded, still intact. I held it for a long time. So much of life gets rewritten. But not everything needs to be deleted. The board threw me a private retirement dinner the following month. Not a grand send-off, just the directors Dana Hartley, a few execs, and Riley. It was held at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the skyline. As the sun dipped behind the buildings, Dana stood. "Marcus, you've been many things to this company. Engineer, guardian, architect. You left once, and we learned what we lost. You came back and reminded us what trust looks like." I stood but said nothing for a long moment. Then, I spent nearly 2 decades thinking my value was in my loyalty. Turns out it was in my vigilance. Silence. Then applause. I didn't crave it, but it felt clean. 3 months later, I started teaching a security architecture course part-time at a local university. Most of my students were fresh-faced eager. One had a tattoo of the Linux penguin. Another used a VPN like it was a religion. But one young woman stayed after class every week. Quiet, observant, sharp. On the last day of the semester, she approached me. "You ever feel like no one notices the person who keeps everything from falling apart?" I smiled. "All the time." "So, how do you not give up?" I handed her a printed copy of an essay I'd written, but never published, Notes from the Man in the Server Room. She took it. "Thanks, Professor Tran." "Just Marcus," I said. "The rest is backup." Shat. At home, Lydia and I found rhythm again. We gardened. We cooked together. She took up pottery. I built her a kiln shed in the backyard. One evening, Sophie called. She'd landed a position at a policy think tank advising on data ethics. "Your ghost stories about corporate tech finally rubbed off on me." She laughed. "They weren't ghost stories," I said. "They were reminders." "Reminders of what?" "That even if they forget what you did, the code remembers." I didn't attend Argonix's next company retreat. Didn't need to. Riley gave the keynote on information ethics and cultural trust. He quoted a line I'd once said in passing. "You don't build security, you build awareness. Security follows." I watched it later that night, sitting alone in my home office. Same desk, new view. I closed my laptop and walked outside. The October air was crisp clean. Lydia joined me on the porch, blanket draped over her shoulders. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, just thinking. "About what?" I looked up at the stars. How many years I spent making sure no one noticed me. And how it took 1 week for everyone to finally see me. She reached over, held my hand. "You were always there," she said. "They just didn't know where to look." Well, a few days later, I got a handwritten card in the mail. No return address. Just the initials JL on the back. Inside. I never said it, but I always knew you were watching. And if I could go back, I wouldn't have underestimated you. The system you built. It worked. Too well for us to hide. You earned this. TL. Trevor Lang. Somewhere, somehow, he'd found out I never pressed criminal charges on him directly. That it was the evidence that took him down, not my voice. He was right. I didn't shout. I didn't smear. I just delivered the truth to the right inboxes. That night, I opened a fresh terminal window on my personal server, typed a simple script. Then I saved it. Not for anyone else. Just for me. There are two kinds of legacies in tech. The ones that flash IPO's media buzz, flashy resignations, and the ones that hum silently, keeping companies afloat through every crash patch and midnight surge. I wasn't the firework. I was the framework. And now, that framework was in place. Not to keep me in, but to keep others out.